The airport buzzed with movement, rushed footsteps, muffled announcements, and the occasional sharp beep of a boarding call. Keanu Reeves, wearing his signature all-black outfit, adjusted his duffel bag strap and glanced at the flight schedule. His face was calm, but his body language carried the weariness of someone who had been on the road too long. Then, something unusual caught his attention. A young soldier, no older than 20, sat hunched on a bench near the terminal window, his hands gripping his head. His uniform was creased, his boots scuffed, and his shoulders shook with quiet sobs. A few travelers stole glances but quickly moved on, unwilling to involve themselves. Keanu hesitated for a second before stepping forward. "Hey, you all right?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant, as he knelt down beside the soldier. The soldier looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face lined with exhaustion and something deeper, despair. "I messed up," he whispered. Before Keanu could respond, a slow, deliberate clap echoed through the terminal. People turned. A man stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed but his expression razor-sharp. He was tall, dressed in a pristine gray suit that contrasted with his cold, calculating gaze. He exuded the kind of presence that made people uneasy without knowing why. "How touching," the man said, his voice smooth, almost amused. Keanu Reeves, always playing the hero. Keanu's jaw tightened. He knew that voice. Adrian Wolfe. A name most people didn't know, unless they dealt in secrets. Adrian was not just wealthy, he was dangerously intelligent, the kind of man who could manipulate anyone into thinking they were in control, until they weren't. He had the kind of power that couldn't be bought, only earned through ruthless, strategic destruction. Keanu stood slowly, placing himself between the soldier and Adrian. "I wasn't aware you had an interest in humanitarian work," Keanu said evenly. Adrian smirked. "Oh, I don't. But I do have an interest in you. And in this young man." His eyes flickered to the soldier. "Tell him, Private Bennett. Tell him what you did." The soldier flinched. His fingers dug into his knees. I didn't mean to," Adrian said, shaking his head. "You see, Keanu, this fine soldier here had a lapse in judgment. One that cost lives. And now, he thinks running will erase that mistake." Keanu's stomach tightened. He looked at the soldier. "What is he talking about?" The soldier's breath hitched. He wiped his face with his sleeve, avoiding Keanu's eyes. Adrian continued, stepping closer, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Poor Bennett here was stationed overseas. One bad decision, one miscalculated move, and innocent people died. He panicked. Filed false reports. Lied to his commanding officers. Now, he's trying to disappear before the truth catches up." The soldier squeezed his eyes shut. It wasn't like that. Keanu could feel the shift in the air. The people around them weren't just watching, they were sensing that something more was unfolding. A quiet tension filled the space, like the heavy pause before a storm. "You're lying," Keanu said, his voice steady but cold. Adrian grinned. "Am I?" He reached into his suit pocket, pulling out a sleek black phone. With a casual flick of his thumb, he tapped the screen, and a recording played. Static. Then voices. "Abort, abort. We weren't supposed to be here," a frantic voice shouted over gunfire. A breathless pause. Then another voice, shaky but recognizable, Bennett's. "They're just civilians. We can't, no, don't." Then, a sound no one wanted to hear. A single, deafening gunshot. The audio cut out. Keanu inhaled slowly, his mind racing. The crowd murmured, shifting uncomfortably. The soldier's hands clenched into fists, his entire body shaking. Adrian slipped his phone back into his pocket. "So you see, Keanu," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "the hero you're so eager to save? He's not a victim. He's a coward who got people killed and now wants to run." Keanu looked at the soldier. And, for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was standing on the right side. For a long moment, silence gripped the terminal. Keanu's mind raced. The recording had shaken him, because it sounded real. Too real. The soldier, Private Bennett, sat frozen, his breathing uneven, his fingers gripping the fabric of his pants so tightly his knuckles turned white. Adrian took a slow step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. He was in control, and he knew it. "You're thinking," Adrian said, tilting his head, his voice smooth, calculated. "Thinking if I fake that recording. If this is some elaborate ploy. But what if it's not?" Keanu's jaw tightened. "Then why are you here? If he's guilty, let the military handle it." Adrian smirked, his hands sliding into his pockets. "Oh, Keanu. I forget you still believe in justice." He chuckled, low and mocking. "This isn't about justice. It's about control. About how a single moment can turn a man into either a hero or a villain." Keanu exhaled, slow and steady. "And you get to decide which is which?" Adrian's grin widened. "I don't decide, Keanu. The world does. I just present the evidence." He turned slightly, angling his body toward the crowd that had gathered, their faces a mix of confusion, curiosity, and unease. Adrian raised his voice, making sure they heard every word. "Tell me," he continued, addressing no one in particular. "If a soldier panics and innocent people die, is he still a soldier? Or is he something else?" A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Keanu caught a woman frowning, arms crossed, as if trying to make sense of the situation. A man in a suit whispered something to his colleague. The atmosphere had shifted, Adrian had planted doubt. Keanu clenched his jaw. "I see what you're doing," he said. Adrian feigned innocence. "Oh? Do tell." "You're controlling the narrative. Manipulating perception. You don't need proof, you just need people to believe you." Adrian's smirk was razor-sharp. "Now you're getting it." Keanu turned to the soldier, searching his face. "Bennett. Tell me what happened." "The truth." Bennett swallowed hard. His lips parted, but no words came out. His eyes darted between Keanu and Adrian, his breathing shallow. He looked trapped. Adrian leaned in, voice dropping just enough for only Keanu to hear. "You really think he'll talk? You think he'll tell the truth when he can barely tell it to himself?" Keanu stiffened. That's when Adrian struck. "You know," he said, stepping back into the open, voice casual, but calculated, "this reminds me of someone else. A certain actor who once made a mistake. A certain star who once trusted the wrong people, got caught in the wrong place, and suddenly, the world turned on him." Keanu's fingers twitched. Adrian's smile was slow and knowing. "You remember that, don't you? When the headlines weren't so kind?" Keanu inhaled through his nose. He knew what Adrian was referring to. Years ago, a personal misunderstanding had spiraled into a media frenzy. A private moment taken out of context, twisted into something ugly. It had taken him years to rebuild his reputation. Adrian knew that. And he was using it. Keanu's silence made Adrian's smirk deepen. "There it is," Adrian whispered. "That flicker of doubt. That hesitation. Just like Bennett." He turned slightly, addressing the onlookers again. "The funny thing about heroes? They're only heroes until people decide they aren't." The words hit Keanu harder than he wanted to admit. He clenched his fists. He needed to take control, but how? Adrian's game was psychological. He wasn't just attacking Bennett, he was attacking Keanu's own past, making him second-guess himself. And worse, he was doing it in front of an audience. Keanu had to say something. Anything. But Adrian beat him to it. "You know what's fascinating, Keanu?" Adrian mused, tilting his head. "You've played so many characters. Warriors. Assassins. Men of principle. But tell me, have you ever wondered if you're just playing a role in real life too?" Keanu froze. The words slithered into his mind before he could stop them. That was the moment Adrian had been waiting for. That tiny hesitation. That half-second of uncertainty. He turned to the crowd, his voice confident, magnetic. "You see, that's the thing about men like Keanu Reeves. They think they're in control. They think they see the bigger picture. But all it takes, he snapped his fingers, is doubt. Keanu exhaled slowly, forcing his body to stay relaxed, but inside, he knew, Adrian had just landed a critical blow. He had made Keanu question himself. And now, he had to figure out how to turn the game around. Keanu inhaled slowly, forcing his mind to quiet the storm Adrian had created. Doubt, Adrian's most effective weapon, had landed its hit, but Keanu wasn't out yet. He just needed to see the play. Then, it clicked. A single detail. Adrian's mistake. Keanu's eyes flickered toward the soldier, Bennett, who still hadn't spoken a word to defend himself. His silence wasn't guilt. It was something else. Fear. But not the fear of being exposed. The fear of saying the wrong thing. Keanu's expression changed. In an instant, the hesitation vanished. His jaw relaxed, his shoulders straightened, and a sharp, knowing glint sparked in his eyes. Adrian noticed it immediately. That shift. That unsettling moment when a hunter realizes the prey is no longer afraid. Keanu exhaled, slow and deliberate. Then he spoke, calm, steady, but with an edge sharp enough to cut through steel. "You're good, Adrian," Keanu said, tilting his head. "But you made a mistake." Adrian's smirk flickered. "Oh?" Keanu stepped forward. "That recording. It was impressive. The panic, the voices, the gunfire. It felt real." He let the words hang for a second before continuing. "But here's the thing, it wasn't." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression remained unreadable. "And how would you know that?" Keanu's lips twitched into the ghost of a smirk. "Because I've been in too many films to know what a staged sound mix sounds like." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Adrian's jaw clenched, barely noticeable, but Keanu caught it. Now he had him. "You see," Keanu continued, voice smooth but sharp, "a real battlefield recording isn't that clean. Audio distortions, overlapping frequencies, environmental noise, but yours?" He cocked his head slightly. It was too perfect. The gunfire didn't distort the voices. The reverb was off. And Bennett's voice? It didn't sound like it was coming through a radio or a helmet mic. It sounded like it was recorded in a controlled environment. Adrian's smirk returned, but this time it was forced. "That's quite a theory." Keanu took another step forward, the tension in the room shifting like a current reversing direction. "It's not a theory. It's a fact. And now that I think about it." He turned to Bennett. "You weren't staying silent because you're guilty, were you?" Bennett's breath hitched. Keanu's gaze sharpened. "You were staying silent, because you were told to." The soldier's eyes darted to Adrian for the briefest second. It was all Keanu needed. A gasp from the crowd. Keanu turned back to Adrian, his stance unshakable. "That's your flaw, Adrian. You control narratives. You manipulate perception. But the problem with fabricating a lie that good, is that it has to be perfect. And real life? Real life is never perfect." For the first time, Adrian's mask cracked. Keanu saw it. A flicker of something behind his eyes. Annoyance? No. Panic. Adrian knew he had lost control of the moment. The power had shifted. And Keanu wasn't letting go. "You didn't come here to expose Bennett," Keanu continued, voice gaining momentum. "You came here to destroy him before the real story came out. Before he could talk." Adrian let out a slow exhale, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the pressure. "All right," he muttered. "Not bad. But tell me, why would I go through all that trouble? What possible reason would I have to silence one soldier?" Keanu's smirk returned, but this time it was cold. Because he wasn't the one who made the mistake, was he? A sharp inhale from Bennett. Adrian's fingers twitched at his side. Keanu took the final step forward, dropping his voice to a whisper only Adrian could hear. "It was you." Adrian's entire body tensed. The word struck like a dagger. Keanu leaned back, his voice returning to full volume. The real story isn't that Bennett panicked. It's that someone powerful, ordered something off the books. And Bennett was the only one who saw what really happened. The crowd murmured louder. Keanu could hear the shift. Adrian had played his cards perfectly. But Keanu had just flipped the table. And for the first time, Adrian Wolfe had no move to make. A single moment of silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the dense, heavy quiet that follows a gunshot. And then, chaos. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. A journalist in the front row, his press badge swinging wildly, scrambled for his pen, knocking over his coffee in the process. He didn't even notice. His hand shook as he flipped his notepad open, frantically scribbling down every word, every detail. A panelist, one of those well-dressed, high-ranking officials who had initially been nodding along to Adrian's claims, stared, frozen. His knuckles widened around the pen he had been holding. It slipped from his grasp and hit the floor with a tiny clink. A woman in a tailored navy suit, standing at the far end of the waiting area, clutched her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. The glow from the screen illuminated her face as she typed furiously, her eyes darting toward Adrian as if confirming something. She wasn't a casual spectator. She was someone important. The realization spread like wildfire, through passengers, reporters, officials, each person absorbing the implications of what had just happened. This wasn't just some celebrity making a dramatic stand. This was something much, much bigger. Keanu had flipped the script. And Adrian knew it. His expression hadn't changed much, he was too well trained for that, but the subtle details were there. The twitch at the corner of his jaw. The way his fingers flexed, then curled back into a loose fist. The sharp inhale through his nose. He was calculating. Measuring the damage. Searching for a way out. But the walls were closing in, and this time, there was no exit. Keanu exhaled slowly, watching the shift in the room. He had seen this before, not in movies, but in real life. That moment when the power changes hands. And Adrian felt it too. Still, men like him never surrendered. Adrian took a slow step back, then let out a breath that was meant to seem amused, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "I have to admit," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "You're quite the storyteller, Keanu." He let the words linger, attempting to regain control. "But let's not get carried away. If, and that's a big if, there was any misrepresentation, it was likely an oversight. We're all just trying to find the truth, aren't we?" A weak play. Keanu didn't even need to respond. Because the room already had. The whispers had turned into something sharper. A woman near the back crossed her arms. "An oversight," she muttered under her breath. That was a full-scale setup. A security officer, standing near the entrance, shifted his stance. His hand hovered over his radio now, his brow furrowed as he watched Adrian more closely. A flight attendant, who had initially only been watching out of curiosity, exchanged a wide-eyed glance with her coworker. Did he just? Yeah, her coworker breathed. He did. Adrian's ears picked up on all of it. And for the first time, his carefully curated expression wavered. Keanu saw it, the frustration, the realization that the narrative had slipped beyond his control. Adrian Wolfe had spent his entire life dictating the story. But now, the story was dictating him. Keanu let the moment breathe before finally speaking. "You built your reputation on controlling narratives, Adrian," he said, his voice steady, measured. "But the problem with controlling the truth, is that it only works if no one asks the right questions." A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Keanu took a small step forward, lowering his voice just enough that it forced everyone to listen more closely. "And right now?" He gestured slightly toward the crowd. "They're asking." Adrian's nostrils flared, his lips parting slightly, as if about to respond. But he didn't. Because there was nothing left to say. The energy in the room had shifted completely. And Adrian Wolfe? He was losing. For the first time, Adrian Wolfe had no control. The once impenetrable armor of his confidence was splintering. His usual smirk, the one that carried the weight of a man always 3 steps ahead, was gone. In its place was something much rarer. A flicker of doubt. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but Keanu saw it. The airport terminal was still crowded, but now it felt more like an arena. People weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing something historic. And Adrian? He was on trial. Keanu's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. A sharpness that cut through the tension like a blade. "You've spent years mastering this," Keanu said, pacing slightly. "Controlling the narrative. Bending reality just enough to make people believe what you want them to." Adrian let out a short breath, as if regaining some composure. "You give me too much credit, Keanu. I'm just a man doing his job." Keanu's jaw tightened. "A job? You call this a job?" He gestured around the terminal, at the passengers who had stopped in their tracks, at the reporters whose fingers were moving rapidly over keyboards, at the security officers now exchanging quiet, serious glances. "A job," Keanu continued, voice dropping lower, "is something people do with integrity. With honesty." He took another step forward. "But you?" His eyes locked onto Adrian's. "You built your empire on fear. And now?" Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Even you are afraid." Adrian stiffened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. But still, he said nothing. Because what was left to say? Keanu pressed on. "All this time, you thought you were untouchable. That no one would ever question you. That no one would dare to pull back the curtain." He let the words sink in, let the weight of them settle over Adrian like a storm cloud. A hush fell over the room. Keanu's next words were slow, deliberate. "But here's the thing about the truth, Adrian." He leaned in slightly. "It doesn't stay buried forever." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Adrian's throat bobbed as he swallowed, but his expression remained impassive. He was still trying to hold on. Still trying to play the game. But Keanu wasn't done. "You see, you never wanted the truth," Keanu continued. "You wanted control. And now?" A small, almost pitying smile ghosted over his lips. "You have neither." The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian's chest rose and fell, his breath coming faster now. And then, "Mr. Wolf." A voice rang out. A deep, authoritative voice. Keanu turned slightly, just in time to see two security officers stepping forward. Their expressions were unreadable, but their posture was clear. This wasn't a suggestion. Adrian knew it, too. His entire body tensed, but for the first time, there was no escape. No smooth words to talk his way out. No carefully placed distractions. Just the weight of his own actions catching up to him. One of the officers spoke again, this time lower. "Come with us." Adrian didn't move. Didn't blink. And then, slowly, reluctantly, he straightened his jacket and let out a sharp exhale. He turned to Keanu. And for the first time that day, his smirk returned. But this time, it wasn't one of victory. It was a mask. A last-ditch effort to save face. "This isn't over," Adrian muttered under his breath. Keanu held his gaze. "It already is." Adrian's nostrils flared. But he didn't argue. Because he knew Keanu was right. The world had already seen the truth. And no amount of manipulation could take that back. The moment the video hit the internet, it spread like wildfire. Not just as a trending hashtag. Not just as another viral clip lost in the chaos of the digital world. But as a reckoning. News outlets scrambled to cover the breaking story. Major networks ran headlines like, "Adrian Wolf exposed in airport confrontation, Keanu Reeves turns the tables." Global backlash erupts against Adrian Wolf, corporate ties under fire. The moment that changed everything, how one question destroyed a career. Clips from the confrontation dominated every platform. Millions of shares. Millions of comments. It wasn't just about a single man anymore. It was about the system he represented. Within hours, Wolf Global Strategies, the powerful consulting firm Adrian had built his empire on, issued a carefully worded statement. We take these allegations seriously and are conducting an internal review of recent events. A weak, empty gesture. No one bought it. By morning, high-profile clients started severing ties. Investors pulled out. The stock of a major media conglomerate linked to Adrian plummeted. Then came the resignation. A senator, one of Adrian's most powerful allies, stepped down under pressure. The official statement spoke of new priorities, but the truth was obvious. He was running. The world reacts. Protests erupted outside Wolf Global's headquarters. Signs reading, "We see the truth," and "No more lies," flooded the streets. An independent journalist, who had spent years trying to expose Adrian but had always been silenced, wrote, "For the first time in my career, I don't feel like I'm shouting into the void. The world is finally listening." Talk show hosts dissected the footage. Analysts debated the impact. Even celebrities who had once feared speaking out were now openly condemning Adrian. It was a collapse in real time. And Adrian knew it. His last attempt to fight back. Adrian appeared in an exclusive interview 2 days later. Dressed in his usual tailored suit, he tried to look composed. But the cracks were visible, his fingers twitching slightly as he clasped his hands together. "This entire situation has been twisted against me," he claimed. Keanu Reeves is a brilliant actor, but let's not pretend he's a journalist. It was a desperate move. And it backfired instantly. The interviewer, a respected journalist, leaned forward. "Are you saying the footage is fake?" Adrian hesitated, just for a second. But in that moment, the world saw him for what he truly was. A fraud. The interview tanked. His last chance to salvage his reputation vanished. Keanu Reeves? He never responded. Because he didn't have to. The truth had already won. And just like that, it was over. One moment of truth. One moment of clarity. And an empire built on deception collapsed before the world's eyes. But here's the real question. Did you see it coming? Think back to the beginning. Adrian Wolf was untouchable. A master manipulator. A man who played the game so well, he convinced the world he was always 5 steps ahead. And yet, all it took was one moment. One person willing to stand up and challenge him. So now, I ask you, what would you have done? Would you have seen through his lies? Would you have dared to question him? Or would you, like so many before, have let the moment pass, thinking, someone else will speak up? Because here's the truth, this wasn't just Keanu's story. It's yours. It's mine. It's everyone's. Every day, we are faced with people like Adrian. People who manipulate, deceive, and twist reality to serve their own power. Some wear suits. Some hide behind screens. Some control governments, corporations, entire industries. But every single one of them has a weakness. The truth. And now, it's your turn. What will you do the next time you see an Adrian Wolf? Will you stay silent? Or will you be the one who asks the question that changes everything? Let me know in the comments below. Because this wasn't just a story. This was a warning.